Hello, I'm going to try this video on how to set up construction for a cylinder when you're really trying to get fairly accurate and specific and understand what's going on behind the scenes. I'm gonna just try to quickly set up the basic construction and explain how I would do that, as well as add in ellipses and how those interact with perspective and stuff like that, so that you can have that much better sense, sort of the height of these ellipses that are going to be in anything cylindrical. And obviously there's an infinite number of imaginary ellipses. Infinite, maybe, yeah, maybe infinite. So I've already been sort of wrestling with how involved to get. So you will probably see some sketch marks already over here. But I think what I'm finalizing. Well, that's fun to say. That I'm gonna set this up in a way where this right here is the vanishing point. This is the horizon or eye level. And one way I like to just sort of set up both 1-point perspective, actually 2-point as well, is using an unmarked straight edge like this. Don't have to use this. But what I like doing, and I have other videos on this, is trying to imagine kind of setting up a capital letter A. I'm looking over here to see where on this particular one, the initial crossbar. So that's a cool lowrider, capital A. I kind of like it. But just kidding aside and starting to think about perspective, really kind of reminding yourself what the heck it is that you're trying to draw. And this setup is similar to setting up all sorts of things, including like a bookshelf or dresser, anything that has multiple horizontal planes in it that are receding in space. So if this is the close edge, and I put these bigger points on it because these points are closer and these are further away, so I'm going to make those a little bit smaller. I want to keep reminding myself that this is the front edge, this is the back edge. In reality, they're the same width, but because of perspective, this one appears smaller than this one. So I'm going to do that for 3 sets of quote-unquote bookshelves first, because those are going to help me create my accurate ellipses. And I'm eyeballing right now, but I do want to make sure that this is equal to this. So let's see how close I am. I do use these fuzzy fuzzy construction lines at first, which I know probably drives some people crazy, but I prefer that to making hard marks and I like tightening things up as I go. One way of using, another way of using this tool that I have right here, this unmarked straight edge, is to help get accurate measurements on the drawing. So if I want to make sure that that distance from here to here is the same as here to here, that looks pretty good. Well, that was sort of a coinky-dink. Anyways, so I know that all the back edges of these shells are going to be this distance, and all the front edges are going to be this. So here's the front edge of the middle shelf, and the way that these edges will be receding is that they'll be angling towards this vanishing point. And that this edge, this back edge of the middle shelf, will both line up with the width of the other back edges, as well as the angles will go from the front edge to the vanishing point. This may be turning into a little bit more of a lesson in one-point perspective than I'm wanting it to, but oh well. Let's get a twofer. So let me see. If this is the front edge, I'm gonna pause a moment and reinforce my closer points and further points approach. These little visual cues I find very helpful, just to sort of think about, okay, all of these points on the front edges are going to be the same distance from me, so they'll be the same size. And all of the far points of the far edges, will be equal distance from the viewer, so those will also be the same size, but they will appear all to be smaller. This was the point right here where I was angling to the vanishing point, and I had copied this width from here to here. So let's see, here's a good example of when you sort of say, all of this stuff is, oh, I guess that ended up a little intersecting a little bit better than I thought it was gonna. But all these things are very, this is all human straight lines, and so they're imperfect by definition, even with a straight edge. So don't expect everything to align perfectly. That's why this is just sort of a construction, underlying foundation. So those are my 3 shelves that I'm going to use to create 3 ellipses that are going to help me really understand this particular cylinder. So when we're talking about drawing the ellipses, and I have a whole video on this, and I'm going to try to make one little clarification from the main video I did on this. But I'm going to want to find the ellipse in this little perspective rectangle, as well as the ellipse in this perspective rectangle. And the one in this. And I don't have to do 3 sort of shelves. You can certainly just do the top and the bottom, quote unquote, shelves. But if this is new to you and you're not sure where these lines are going, like I'm not, it's just good practice and just helpful to confirm that, yeah, everything is lining up. I've got things relatively equal distant, and so these are all crisscrossing on a common vertical here. That's good. That's just guideline stuff. So the tricky part comes in now as far as ellipses, because what I want to remember anytime I'm drawing an ellipse, and I'm drawing it in this rectangle in perspective, it's good to do because I know that the center of the ellipse is going to be where this intersects. The ellipse is also going to pass through this point and this point. It's going to pass through this point and this point as well. But you see now that this distance is shorter than this distance. And when you're drawing an ellipse, you need to make sure that you have symmetry both left to right and up and down. So I'm wanting to bisect this minor axis, shorter axis, to help me understand where the major axis is, to help me draw the ellipse. Now the last video I did, which is not all the way accurate, I'm figuring out, I marked these points right here, and I tried using those to help me draw the ellipse. And indeed, I said that the ellipse will actually go through this point as well as this point. But if you blow this thing up enough, and it's in really quite especially if it's exaggerated, it doesn't actually go quite through that point there. It gets close. But another way of thinking about it is that I'm gonna because I do know that it goes through this point, I also know that since this is all symmetrical, it'll go through a point right there. This is getting really sort of deep into ellipses, and that's all great to know, but I'm going to leave it there for now as far as describing what's going on. But mainly I want to make sure that that this ellipse is symmetrical both left and right. That is, I could fold this over and that way, and it would fit exactly. And I could also fold it up and down on the major axis, and that would sync up exactly. So that's a lot. I'm gonna just do that for these other guys too, and the higher up and flatter, the smaller everything gets. And it seems like, I don't know, oftentimes it seems like, really, am I gonna go to all this trouble? And I'm gonna let you decide that. So I was fussing there a little with the intersection for the center point of the ellipse. And then there's the major axis. It's going to go through there and almost there and almost there. And the smaller it gets, the more squished it is, so the trickier it is as well. One of the reasons I'm sort of leaving in this point and this way of doing it, even though it's not exactly perfectly exactly accurate, is that I have found that for practical purposes, it's pretty darn helpful. By the time I'm talking here, the distances are so small, especially depending on the size of your drawing, that I think it's pretty helpful to just aim for this point and then turn around your ellipse. Go watch my other video, the other longer video on that if you're curious. Little adjustments along the way. So by the time we're getting to this top one, which is pretty squished, huh? The difference between that intersection, I even cheated a little bit there, and bisecting the minor axis is getting pretty darn close to each other. And actually, I'm fudging a little bit. That first one is probably even lower, but I'm trying to think of minor axis and the major axis going through the middle of the bisection of the minor axis is my turnaround points. So that tells me the height of these three underlying ellipses in this cylindrical drawing. They aren't perfect, and these back ones especially I'm not going to see in the final drawing. But I really need to know where, I want to know where they are to help me understand the curve that I can see. So now at this point, I'm just going to come across the top ellipse and get to this point, and where it starts circling around here for this particular moment, I'm going to break with that and start drawing this line, which represents all of those ellipses in this cylinder, the point around which I can't see anymore. It's not an actual line, so don't, or it's not a real edge. So it's good to remember that there's sort of no corner points. So at this point, I'm very fond of getting a paper towel or a Kleenex and just smudging things around. Oh, look, there's something right there. To make it really ugly. No. And then using a snaked up kneaded eraser. So obviously, hopefully, obviously, all these points and stuff that I drew in really strongly were just for demonstration. I'm not going to do that when I'm trying to draw a cylinder in a drawing per se. So if I just knock all that stuff back and start just refining what my final marks are going to be. No, start refining. Because I'll be due after I'm shading, all along the process, you're refining. Do that ellipse. Where it meets this one. Where you line up over here. I wish I had more drawing board right about now. So that would be the basic outline of the cylinder. I'm just erasing here a little bit more and try to do sort of just a really quick shading. You know, truth be told, I would, it depends how big this drawing was, if it was on an easel or just a small clipboard. Since it's just on a small clipboard and I want to shade it such that a light source is hitting, somewhere around there. And then as the light curves, as the object curves, there's going to be less and less light hitting the object. And shading as a whole, another fun big topic. But I try to think of things in terms of making sure at least I'm getting some kind of feeling of a gradation the less light there is. I'm being pretty quick and sloppy, I confess. But I think it's nice to just sort of start to really feel the roundness, the rounding of this cylindrical object. There's all sorts of reflected light and all sorts of other stuff and going on when you get into shading and modeling, rendering. There's a bunch of fun words for this. I'm not sure why that is. They all mean slightly different things, it seems to me. But that's the idea for that. And I could take the time to keep grading darker and darker as it gets, as the object receives less and less light. But that's a different little subject. Can come back with the kneaded eraser and take away a little bit of that. So that's the idea for drawing something cylindrical, where you're trying to make sure it's jiving up with the perspective of the rest of the drawing. This is bugging me more and more, but I'm going to let go. So yeah, try that. You can get it to something more like this with more time and whatnot, but have fun.